In today's video, we are going to do a deep dive into the fascinating realm of narcissism, understanding the seismic shift that occurs when a narcissist finally realizes that they lost you. And we'll go through the actual layers in escalating order of exactly what tends to take place when a narcissist finally has the full realization that you are no longer a part of their lives. And most importantly, if you stick around to the end of this video, we'll talk about what to do if you are seeing some of these challenging features take place. First and foremost, one of the first things that you'll see, and there's really five major categories or features here that, again, tend to escalate in terms of order of what happens. But the very first piece is narcissists tend to have an intense emotional reaction. Now, usually after there's a breakup with a narcissist, they tend to often think that they can kind of have you back at their own wishes, sort of on a whim. And it isn't until there's this final realization, which usually occurs in particular if you go completely no contact with a narcissist, that they realize, oh, I actually can't just have you back the moment I try to resurface or reconnect with you. And in this particular case, we'll generally first see quite an intense emotional reaction. Of course, as you can imagine, a narcissist does not want to not have their way. So initially, the narcissist in this particular case may experience a big surge of negative emotions, ranging from kind of disbelief and denial, and then moving into profound sadness and anger. And it's usually at this point that because their ego tends to really thrive and sort of derive itself from having a sense of control and having a sense of constant admiration, as soon as they realize that this part of what they were getting from the ex, potentially you listening to this video, is no longer available to them, they're generally faced with quite a severe blow of rejection and even feelings of abandonment. Now, I think it's really important on this first point here to recognize that usually people who end up in relationships with narcissists tend to be extremely empathic people. They often tend to be boundaryless and feel more for other people than they do themselves, and really go out of their way to bend over backwards for people at the expense of their own boundaries or needs or feelings. And so, just because you're hearing that the narcissist has an intense emotional reaction, and I imagine you're probably feeling some degree of empathy from hearing that, that is not an excuse to weaponize your empathy against yourself and in turn go back to a relationship that was not supporting you and probably very much harming you. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind. And especially as you hear these preceding parts of what will generally happen next. Number two, there will often be this phase that the narcissist experiences where they go through idealization of the past relationship and even regret. And so this will essentially be this form of hindsight bias where the narcissist will reflect back on the past, and in realizing that they may not have access to the control or admiration or narcissistic supply that they are seeking, they may in turn start focusing selectively on the positive memories while downplaying the negative experiences that led up to the breakup. Now, this is something often that takes place for many people, not just a narcissist, for example, where you may romanticize an ex and view them through rose colored glasses and see a lot of the positive or upside, but not really see much of the downside in this particular instance. Now, this is a phase. Okay. So the narcissist, when they're experiencing this anger, this disbelief, this frustration, they have that intense emotional reaction. They will then see all of the things that they lost and all the things that they're missing. And yes, they will focus on those things. But again, this is a stage where they will then move into stage number three. And I think it's really important to recognize that these stages become increasingly, I don't want to say dangerous because it can be dangerous truly, but increasingly volatile would be a better descriptor here for how the narcissist will approach what they're experiencing when they realize they've lost you. This brings us to part three, which is then we will see often hoovering attempts from the narcissist. And really, this comes from an effort to regain control and narcissistic supply. And thus, the narcissist may actually, start creating these manipulation tactics known as hoovering. And basically, what that is, is it can be bombarding an ex with many messages, it can be apologies, it can be promises of change. And more often than not, there are some really grandiose gestures that the narcissist will use as this strategy to get back with their ex. And a lot of times, too, because the narcissist actually has a very similar impact on levels of dopamine and oxytocin that we would see in love addiction. What will end up often taking place is somebody who's leaving a narcissistic relationship will really second guess whether or not they should hold their boundaries. Not to go too far down a rabbit hole here, but you'll hear of something known as intermittent reinforcement. And intermittent reinforcement is what gamblers essentially get addicted to, where, for example, you pull a slot machine lever and every third time you might win, and every 47th time you might win, or 56th time. And generally, there's this intermittency of reward. And this is something that actually narcissists very much mirror in relationships with their exes, where they will sometimes, that obviously they start off with a lot of the love bombing, get you sort of addicted. They tend to know exactly what somebody's deeply needing from a relationship. They play into those things. They sort of become a chameleon and present themselves as having all of those things that you've forever wanted or have felt like you were missing. And then when they know that they've hooked you, the intermittent reinforcement begins. And so we'll generally see a lot of this like addictive element to leaving a narcissist. And so when we look at number three here, those hoovering attempts, often individuals who are leaving a narcissistic relationship can be quite vulnerable to these hoovering attempts. And it's from this that we really want to be looking at what you can do afterwards. But we still have two more important things to cover first in regards to what happens when the narcissist realizes that they lost you. This is where things can get tricky. So, we often have, if there are unsuccessful hoovering attempts, we often have smear campaigns that may begin at this point, where a narcissist has a very difficult time accepting responsibility for their side of the breakup. They tend to see things as explicitly and extremely one sided. And they may begin to launch a smear campaign for their ex, basically as a way of salvaging the damage done to their ego. So they may spread rumors to everybody. If you had a friend group, for example, that was shared, you may find them really spreading rumors or distorting the truth in various forms and really basically go out of their way to vilify their ex as an attempt to discredit that person and as a strategy to, if they discredit that person, basically preserve their own self image. And again, this is this coping mechanism the narcissist uses because they have such a big, essentially hole in their bucket of being able to feel a sense of inner significance and safety and stability within themselves. And so, as a means of covering those feelings of emptiness, they really have to go out of their way to constantly garner narcissistic supply and put the image of themselves above any sort of empathy that they could possibly have the capacity to feel for an ex or somebody they're dating. And if you have ever been through other videos on this channel about narcissism or the DSM-5, for example, you know that one of the major of 9 criteria that can be used to diagnose a narcissist or somebody truly with narcissistic personality disorder is the lack of empathy that they tend to feel and experience. So then we get into stage 5 here. And again, we still are going to cover what you can do if you're seeing some of these behaviors pop up when you know that the narcissist has probably realized or is about to realize that they've lost you. And then what to do is really important. I do want to say that just for the month of May, for Mental Health Month, we're doing a 14-day site wide free trial. So literally, you can access any of our courses fully for free just for a limited time. And one of the courses I highly recommend if you're coming out of a relationship with a narcissist or trying to leave one is overcoming narcissistic abuse. We have a course. It has really, really powerful tools for helping you pull those levers of understanding what's really going on and doing some deep inner healing, but also maintaining your boundaries after leaving a relationship with a narcissist. So I will put a link to that down below if you want to check that out for free, or any of our other courses out for free for a limited time. And this brings me to point number 5 here, which is that narcissists will tend to seek replacement supply. So they tend to really struggle to tolerate being alone and facing their own insecurities. And in that case, they may actually seek out new sources of narcissistic supply because they're really needing that validation and admiration from the outside world that they are feeling this inability to source internally. And so this is where they may jump into rebound relationships or engage in reckless behaviors to basically distract themselves from their own inner feelings of emptiness and to bolster their fragile feelings of their own self esteem. Now, I want to be mindful here that I'm not sitting and like bashing this person, right? These are the facts. These are the things that narcissists really tend to do and engage with after relationships. A narcissist is essentially somebody who's going through severe trauma and generally has been so traumatized at some point in their life that they really have separated from this sense of true self and from being able to really be in touch with their own vulnerability. And they have such a mask that they've put up, and basically this other sense of self they're trying to derive as almost a distraction from their own emptiness, that they form this very narcissistic personality. But I think that we have to note that trauma in its own way is contagious. Like, not in germ theory way that we would typically think of, but literally trauma is contagious. Anybody in proximity to somebody with a lot of trauma will see that that trauma will tend to spread. It is very difficult not to take it on. So this brings me to this part of the video where we talk about what to do. And one of the first things you have to do, especially if you're considering going back to the narcissist, is sit down and write out all of the costs of staying in a relationship like this. All of the costs to your self esteem, to your friendships, to your family relationships, to how you feel on a daily and weekly basis, to your own physical health and well being, to your own career goals and ambitions, to your own finances, really looking through multiple areas of your life and writing the costs and taking a real hard look. Because when we take inventory of how a relationship like this is actually affecting our lives, it helps us really be able to see outside of this slippery slope we can fall into, where we go back to fantasizing about the love bombing phase and get hooked on that when that's not an accurate depiction of the entirety of a relationship to a narcissist. Sure, it starts off nicely. And yes, we get conditioned by the narcissist to think that this is a perfect relationship in the first few weeks or very early months of the love bombing beginning. But that is not the entire picture. It is a very, very small puzzle piece of a very big puzzle with many other pieces that have a lot to do with distress, trauma, abuse, neglect, intermittent reinforcement, the roller coaster of relationships, volatility, your self esteem being stripped. I mean, there's some really difficult things here. And we have to be willing to take an honest look. So, on the flip side of that, you can look at the benefits of leaving a narcissistic relationship, the benefits of actually setting ourselves free, of, actually breaking away from all of the bombardment of all of these challenging features of a narcissistic relationship on a daily basis. And it's a great time to really look at, how this will benefit if you stick to your guns and you keep your boundaries, how this will really benefit your friendships, your family relationships, your future romantic life, the relationship you have to yourself, perhaps to children if you have kids, and to your finances, to your career, to your own goals, to your peace, stability, happiness. Really taking an honest look and journaling these things out can be very reinforcing. And then you want to get into setting boundaries and making sure you are gray rocking, because when you are able to do this, this is actually going to be how the exit away from a narcissistic relationship goes the most smoothly. Because narcissists are seeking narcissistic supply, generally, if you give them too much of anything, good or bad, it actually gives them narcissistic supply. So if you give them good attention, of course, they're going to rely on you as a source of supply. But if you give them negative attention, they see that as them having control over you. And that still indirectly feeds their need for narcissistic supply. So it's really important to be mindful of that. And when we gray rock and we literally just make sure we have boundaries, we don't engage much at all. We do the literal least that we can to engage and to let that person get an emotional reaction from us. This is where you'll start to see the narcissist move in a different direction in terms of maybe trying to poke or prod at somebody else. And then we want to take a look at the needs that the narcissist met. See, generally, what happens is, unfortunately, most people who fall in love with a narcissist fall in love with being love bombed more than they fall in love with the narcissist themselves. In other words, the narcissist is very good at getting to know your deeply unmet childhood needs and painting a picture for you of the potential, the fantasy of you never having to go with those needs unmet again. But we have to be able to differentiate between fantasy and reality, between potential, dating somebody's potential versus the truth. And what you'll generally see if you are willing to take an honest look is that in the love bombing stage, in those early stages of dating, there's this picture painted that is almost like an outline that never got colored in. It's almost like they painted a picture or told you about a picture, but they never finished the construction of the picture all the way through. They paint this image of all the future things that will happen that they will do, but if you look honestly, they usually never took place. And so we want to be able to realize what those needs were that this promise was of being met. Were we going to feel forever seen or protected or prioritized or wanted or made to feel important or like we mattered? And what we need to be able to do to actually break free from holding on to this past relationship with a narcissist is learn to meet those needs in the relationship to ourselves, as well as source them from other healthy people in our lives. And when we can do that, that is when our subconscious mind will no longer be trying to rely on this relationship of the past as a means of trying to get those needs met. And you will feel a sense of closure and peace and a real ability to move on. So there's so much more we could go into talking about this topic, but I will say if you want to do a much deeper dive, check out that course for free, all about overcoming and healing from a narcissistic relationship. And I'm in there 3 days a week. If you want to ask me any questions, I'll be there to support you. We have all these different live events with trained facilitators, counselors, and coaches, all available for free for a limited time. So check that out using the link down below. Thank you so much for watching and for stopping by. If you enjoy this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And I can't wait to see you in future videos.